Hey there, and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The FCC has released requirements and kind of the format for service providers and other entities that want to challenge the data that's in the Broadband Fabric. I'll be right back to explain all that. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey, here with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, the FCC has basically, they came out with their Broadband Fabric or their Location Fabric back on June 30th. So this is kind of the underlying data that's going to hold all of the location information for where they, or really their contractor CostQuest says, are the broadband serviceable locations in the U.S. and U.S. territories, Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., etc. So they have come out and said, okay, they've identified each structure everywhere, and then they've tried to determine, is this structure supposed to have broadband or is it not? So that's basically what the fabric is. And there's a location ID for each one of those structures. It's not a physical address. There's a physical address somewhat associated with it, but the location ID is supposed to be kind of a data point right in the center of that structure. So it's not like sometimes you look up an address and the location is somewhere off to the side and they're not exactly correct. It's supposed to be right there in the center of that structure that's supposed to get broadband. So that's the Broadband Fabric. Service providers, any facilities-based internet provider now has until September 1st to take their serviceable locations, that's basically all the homes and businesses that they pass, and then compare that to the Fabric data, and then they need to take their serviceable locations, make coordinate with the location ID in the Fabric. So their address has to be then synced up with the location IDs in the Fabric. Then they need to upload that data into the CostQuest Fabric, basically adding their data to that Fabric by September 1st. And that's going to show they need to input, yes, we do provide service there, or we can provide service there with a standard installation. Our max upload and download speed at that location is whatever it is. It's fiber, or it's cable, or it's wireless. Yes, it's considered low latency, which would be 100 milliseconds or less, or if it's not, they would note that. If it's a multi-tenant kind of unit, they would have to confirm the number of units at that location. So it's not a lot of information they need to provide, but they need to get it in the right format, sync it up with the location IDs, which are specific proprietary IDs that are in the Fabric, along with their address. If they can't upload their address in the Fabric, it's got to be that location ID. So they've got that to figure out between now and September 1st. But there are other entities that can be going into the Fabric, that can be looking at it, communities, states, local communities, tribal entities, other stakeholders can go into the Fabric and look at it. You need a FCC registration number to do that, but so some will be having to get that registration number. But they can go in and try to determine how correct the information is in the Fabric now, if they want to do that. And they can actually challenge that information within the Fabric, as can the service providers. So the service providers can look at the Fabric and say, wait a minute, these particular addresses are not broadband serviceable, or maybe these are serviceable and they don't have those down. So they can make those challenges, and they can do that in a bulk format. They have to do it through the FCC portal, the same place they would upload the Broadband Fabric, and that information then goes to CostQuest. So they have to do it in that way. And they've laid out a process now, the FCC has, for how this is to be done. So here is this is the public notice right here where you can get that. I will link to this. I'll link to the public notice at the end of this. I'll also show you the kind of the manual, so to speak, that's got all the information on what you need to upload if you're going to do this. So this would be something that, again, various entities might want to do if they want to do these challenges. So I guess, something just to keep in mind is that you can be doing this now, as far as I can tell. Now that this format is here, I don't have access to the Fabric. I'm not a service provider, but I'm assuming that service providers can start getting this information together now and start forming these challenges before the Fabric is completed, I would think. Otherwise, why would they provide this now? There's not any information yet about when you can do this, but I'm assuming this is something you can do now or in the near future. So in other words, if you have challenges that you want to make, you don't need to wait until the FCC maps come out as far as the Broadband Fabric. Once the Fabric is done, and all the service providers put their information there, there's going to be another challenge process, and that's when everyone can get involved, and that's going to be when all of the service providers have their information kind of overlaid on top of the Fabric. So you'll be able to go to a map, look up an address and see what kind of service is there, who says they're providing service, what speeds they say they're providing. And then even a consumer, in that case, can go in and just one address at a time. They can challenge their address. Or again, other stakeholders can challenge addresses via that process, one address at a time at that point. So I was going to go through, I was just going to show this public notice, and then I was going to show the document that's got all the information about the different fields. So I won't read all of this, but just to give you an idea what it's about. So again, this sets forth the requirements for filing bulk challenges to broadband serviceable location data in the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric. Also provides further details on which locations are considered BSLs in the production version of the fabric, which I find kind of interesting and informative, so I'll cover that as well. Service providers, governments, and other entities and organizations can submit challenges or proposed corrections to the location data in the fabric. If the same entity submits multiple fabric challenges at the same time, then those bulk challenges must be submitted in the BDC system via file upload and must conform to the specifications set forth in the data specifications for bulk fabric challenge data. I'm going to show that format. In a comma-separated value, or CSV format, all fields must be included, all values must conform to the descriptions, codes, or formats identified, and they provide that information. Broadband serviceable locations, that's defined as a business or residential location in the U.S., and again, this includes territories, et cetera, at which fixed broadband internet access service is or can be installed. And they say, the Act says within 10 days, what they're talking about is standard installation. In other words, you're passing that home. You don't need to extend your mainline plant to get to that home. You basically just need to do just a drop to the home to take care of that. So all residential structures, including structures that are or contain housing units or group quarters, all non-residential, business, government, nonprofit, etc., structures that are on property without residential locations and that would expect to demand broadband internet access. There's a caveat that they kind of explain here a little bit further on. The fabric reflects each BSL as a single point defined by a set of geographic coordinates that will fall within the footprint of a structure, as I mentioned. In order to refine the fabric data over time, the Broadband Data Act and Commission rules incorporate a process for entities to challenge locations in the fabric that they believe have been misidentified or mischaracterized. And there's going to be a lot of that in this initial broadband fabric and filing, because we're going to have to sort a lot of that out, because CostQuest was taking their best stab at this, and in some cases it's easier than others. So if they're looking at land parcels and ownership in a residential neighborhood, it's pretty easy to identify house, and figure out who's supposed to get broadband there. But when you get into the more rural areas, you've got multiple structures, you've got businesses that could be really large that might not qualify, which you'll see here. Then it gets a little bit questionable. So there's going to be lots of correcting, I think, in certain areas on this first go-round. Then once that's done, once the broadband fabric gets closer to reality, then there's going to be less of this ongoing, other than, let's say, new areas that are added, new greenfield locations, I would think, or areas that are no longer there, like buildings that are knocked down or places that go out of business, maybe, I don't know. Residential parcels. So for a single residential parcel with one single-family home, the structure of the single-family home will be identified as one BSL in the fabric. That makes sense. Similarly, an individual townhome or row house that is on its own parcel will be identified as one BSL. Again, that's pretty much just a single family dwelling. In situations where there is one residential structure but more than one housing unit on the parcel, for example, a duplex, triplex, apartment building, or home with a basement apartment, the fabric identifies the structure as one BSL but includes a number of separate housing units. So a lot of that's going to be gotten from records, tax records, those kinds of things. So that's the kind of information that can also be corrected, I guess, via the number of units in a home. We'll see that. Let's see what else there was in here of interest. Yeah, this I thought was very informative. So differentiating between mass market broadband locations and non-mass market broadband locations. Production version of the fabric also includes but does not identify as BSLs community anchor institutions and other high density or high demand locations. Locations of this type are most commonly subscribed to enterprise business data broadband services, which are not included in the BDC. I wasn't exactly sure why. AT&T, for example, could be delivering fiber to your home, and they could also be delivering fiber to a big enterprise, at a building, Coca-Cola or something like that. I don't know. So I'm not sure why that's the case, but that's what they're saying. While these locations may subscribe to mass market services in some instances, well, there you go. So it could be that somebody is. We currently lack data that would enable us to make reliable determinations of when this is the case. The objectives underlying the Broadband Data Act would not be well served by designating these types of locations as BSLs when they likely would not subscribe to mass market broadband services. Accordingly, without location-specific data showing otherwise, these locations will not be designated as BSLs in the fabric. Examples of such locations include office buildings with demand for enterprise-level broadband service, so I guess your major corporations, and the following types of community anchor institutions: schools, hospitals, including VA facilities, government buildings and courthouses, executive mansions, I would think that would mean like the governor's mansion, or and state and legislative buildings, fire EMS stations, Red Cross facilities. So these are all, I think they're talking about places that are government entities that certainly could be getting, I mean, there's no reason that a local cable provider, this would be the case throughout the country, like a local cable provider could certainly provide access to the library and to the police buildings and places like that. If the municipality is not doing broadband, then a lot of times they do get it from the local provider. So I think there's going to be a lot of updates to these places that are not considered BSLs right now in the fabric, especially in rural America where you've got the independent broadband operators are providing a lot of the services to the towns. I think we'll be seeing that being challenged or changed, updated. Red Cross facilities. In addition, we assume that local government buildings and jurisdictions with a population, now they mentioned here, with a population of at least 500,000 are more likely to rely on enterprise or self-provisioned broadband service and will not be identified as BSLs. As noted above, if the Commission or its contractor obtain information through a challenge or otherwise and determines that a building originally identified in the fabric as taking enterprise broadband services instead takes mass market broadband internet access services, then that building will be identified in a future version of the fabric as a BSL. And I'm assuming when they say a future version of the fabric, I'm assuming that the production fabric that's being worked on right now can be changed prior to the first FCC map coming out. You know, otherwise, I think we'd want to be getting this kind of stuff done before the maps come out. So I'm assuming they're saying that this will be making changes to this current broadband fabric, maybe not necessarily on what people are looking at now, but when the maps, in other words, when the fabric is used to make the map, I hope they would be making these updates prior to making the map. I would think that would be the case. So that's, again, the public notice. There's information on here, if, you know, for help, I think, right here. What is it? Yeah, please visit this site. So there's that. And then in here, I think, is a link, and I will link to this as well at the end here, to the actual, this is the data specifications for that Fabric Challenge data, the initial release of this, and then just a quick overview. As part of the FCC, broadband data collection, service providers, governments, and other entities and organizations can submit bulk challenges or proposed corrections to the broadband fabric. Bulk fabric challenge data, again, must be submitted through the BDC through a file upload. Individuals will have the opportunity to submit single location challenges to the fabric from the FCC's broadband map once the map is published. So like I said, once the map is there, then you and I or anybody, any individual can go in there and look at their address or submit a challenge. Bulk fabric challenge data. The bulk fabric challenge data includes information about a dispute with or proposed correction of the fabric. This information includes the entity's name. So in other words, if you were going to challenge this, you'd have to include your name, contact information, the location of the dispute, the category of the challenge, and evidence to support the dispute. Now this isn't a CSV file, so you're not typing up a novel here. You're basically just putting in some codes in a CSV. Note that the FCC's fabric contractor, CostQuest, will receive the bulk fabric challenge data. So the same folks that developed the fabric will be receiving this challenge data. And I'm assuming they're going to have a process going through and trying to verify is this challenge correct or not as best they can. And again, hopefully they'll do that prior to the first maps being generated. And then they show the different fields in here. So again, this is basically, it's a CSV file, and you need to just go in there and enter this information. You need to make sure that you have, as it mentioned, all of the fields, like these fields here, contact name, contact email, in this exact format. And you need to have the exact information that they're looking for. So they give you the field name, the type of field it is, an example, and then what it is. So, you know, obviously contact name, email, phone number, category code. So these category codes are also referred to further down in here where it's saying, if you are going to file this kind of type of challenge, then it's required for categories 1 and 3, for example. It's optional for maybe some other categories. It's not part of categories 6 and 7, so they'll tell you that information in here. So again, your categories, you would put a 1 if it's missing broadband serviceable location. So that could be an example, again, might be a library that's being served by a local cable operator, but it's not listed as a BSL because it's an anchor institution, might be an example of that. Incorrect location, primary address, so that could be that an address has changed or it's not right, obviously. Incorrect location unit count, so it could be it's an apartment building that's a serviceable location that says there's 100 units, but there's really 105. Incorrect location building type code, we'll see what those building type codes are a little further down here. Location is not within the footprint of the correct building, so maybe it's a farm and you've got 5 different structures and they have the location centered on the barn and not on the home. Maybe the home is designed like a barn and the barn looks like a home. Who knows? I don't know. Let's see what else. Location is not broadband serviceable, so that could be a situation where it's marked as serviceable. It's not. It could be, again, a big enterprise business that or a government location that they're doing their own broadband. And you need to add a supplemental address, would be number 7. And then you see the location IDs. You need to have that. So again, the fabric is based around these. I think it's a 9 or 10 digit number. It's a location ID starting with, I think in the production fabric, I think it starts with a 1. Yeah, I think the production was 1. So you've got that oh, here you go. There's the example. So location ID. And how many numbers is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is that 10? Something like that. Can't count here. Too small. So you've got that you need to put. You've got your address, obviously city, state. You need to put that stuff in. Zip code suffix, and then unit count. So again, here those things are kind of self-explanatory here. Unit count, again, if you're going to correct the number of units in there, and it tells you on all of these where it's required. For example, here under unit count, it's required if the category code value is 1 or 3. Values must be null if the category value is 2, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So you would put this as a null if it was any of those, but if you put a 1 or a 3, then you have to have this in here, and that would be, you have to refer back here and you say, okay, 1 or 3, that's missing broadband serviceable location or incorrect location count. So I guess that missing broadband serviceable location would be, hey, here's an apartment building that's not on here, so you need to have that plus your unit count. Building type code, this was mentioned earlier. So in general, in the fabric, when service providers are uploading their information, they're going to put a B, an R, and an X. It's either a business-only location, it's a residential-only location, or it's business and residential together. They've got these other codes on here: group quarters location, community anchor institution, enterprise location. So it says again here, values required if the category value is 1 or 4 in this case. So you'd go back and see what those were, and it must be null if these others are the codes. So we could see this as an example again of you're having to put in something as an E. Maybe it's marked as a broadband serviceable location. You're going to mark it as an E because it's not a B or an R. It's not a broadband serviceable location, would be what I would imagine that would be. Non-BSL code. This would be the type of, so if it's not a BSL, then you would put why it's not a BSL. Is it a school? Is it a library? Is it a government location? Healthcare, like a hospital. F would be fire, EMS. E is enterprise. P, there's no power. So if you have no power, then you can't have broadband. Location no longer exists. I guess maybe it's been raised or something. And R, this is the location that does not require a network connection for another reason and should be removed from the fabric. So that would be kind of your catch-all. Again, your reasons or your codes that need to be included. And then finally, BSL lacks address flag. So I guess this would be there's no address on that BSL, so it's how do you identify it, I guess. Oh, it's not the last thing here. Then you've got latitude and longitude. So this would be a situation where you're saying that the BSL location is not where it's supposed to be. And then you need to correct that. So you need to put in your lat and long. and it mentions here, you know, got to be precise 6 decimal digit, and again it mentions where you would use this. This is required if you're going to be categories 1 or 5, and they're null. Needs to be marked as null if it's 2, 3, 4, 6, or 7. So on any that you're not challenging, you need to make those null. I guess nothing in there, or maybe there's some other character you need to put in there. And then you've got 1 or 5 in this case, like that. So there you go. So you can, if you're any of these, again, if you're a stakeholder in some way where you are wanting to look at this fabric and make sure that all of the broadband serviceable locations are correct, now is the time to start doing that. You don't want to wait, because it's going to be a long process. And again, what's going to basically happening now is service providers are going into this fabric, and they're going to be making challenges, right? So service providers are going to go in and they're going to be looking at their data, they're going to be looking at the fabric data and be saying, wait a minute, this is not an area that can have broadband. We can't serve this. We've tried to serve this, and here's why. So then they need to go in and challenge that. But others can challenge that as well. You know, like I say, local communities, states, tribal organizations, any other kind of stakeholders can go in and challenge that. And you want to do that now, because the service providers are going in and they're overlaying their serviceable locations that they cover into the fabric. And then when that's done, September 1st, the FCC is going to take that information and they're going to put that all together. And then sometime around, they say November, the map comes out. When the map comes out, then there's going to be a whole nother challenge process of, you know, the map says this area does not have broadband, but it does. This area, it says this area has broadband at the speed, but it's not. We provide, you know, well, service provider, everything that they say they provide broadband should be on the map, but other people have a chance to challenge at that point. But now would be the time for the real stakeholders, not consumers like us, but the real, well, you're not a consumer maybe, but a consumer like me would not be challenging at this point. This would be the folks that are down on the ground looking at the community and saying, where do we need broadband? And they need to be looking at this. They should challenge that now, so that when the map comes out, it's as accurate as possible, so that we can limit the amount of challenges that take place after that. So if you've got any questions about that, feel free to leave a comment. I will always try to find answers for you. If I can post that on the YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, click the little bell. When you click the bell, you'll be notified when I'm live. You need to make sure that you set up notifications in YouTube and on your devices, but you'll be notified when I'm live. If this was helpful, please give me a thumbs up on the video. I'd appreciate that. And I will see you next time for broadband deployment.